Just to introduce myself, I'm Diane Coleman. I'm the Arts Marketing and Online Strategy Manager here at Urban Art Space. I'm one of a team of 6 people here, full-time staff, and we also have 15 to 20 interns. I'll go more into that later. But Urban Art Space is a gallery that's affiliated with The Ohio State University, but we do a lot of shows outside of that. So in addition to student and faculty from the university, we do outside artists who are from Ohio and from beyond that. So we often have curators, from within the university or outside of it who bring in national and international artists into our space. And so for the structure of this session here, I want to just go over what we'll be touching on. So we'll start with like an overview of our 2 gallery spaces because we have one downtown and one on campus, and then an introduction to all of our staff and our mission, which will help you in crafting your proposal to adhere to our mission. And then examples, some different project types like solo versus group exhibitions, that sort of thing. And then also examples of community programming, because that's something we're really emphasizing in this proposal round for the 2025-26, and how we define community programming, examples of what that might look like. And then I'll also do a walkthrough of our web form, which is just like our online form for how you'll be submitting the proposal. And then I'll also show you the actual proposal rubric that our committee will be using. So all of our proposals are evaluated by an outside committee rather than by our staff. So that's why I'm able to give you any sort of tips or feedback that you need, because I'm not going to be part of the selection process. And then at the end, we'll have an open Q&A, so you can ask any questions that you might have that weren't addressed during the presentation. And this photo here is actually our current show that's up. This is a faculty project from Ohio State, and it's design projects and research. So it's the culmination of professors and their students' work in the design field. So they have kind of fashion, also like different types of like plate design and community design, sustainability, recycling, that sort of thing. So it's one example of the many different types of shows that we have here. And so Urban Art Space, which is our downtown gallery, is located in the Lazarus building. This was an old department store. We are actually located in what used to be the discount section of the old department store, and we're across from the Columbus Commons. And so we have roughly 7,500 square feet of gallery space down here. And because of that very large space, we can sometimes have up to 3 shows because we have an upper gallery, a lower gallery, and then this corridor space. And I'll show you images of those. But that means that you could have a show that fills all of those spaces as well. Like this current design show does fill the entire space. But in August, we had 3 different shows at the same time. And we try to make them somewhat complementary to each other, but sometimes they are quite different, which is also enjoyable because you get different audiences, coming in to see one show, and then they're like, oh, look at this other show that I might not have checked out otherwise. So I really enjoy having the full gallery filled. And then we consider ourselves a reciprocal learning environment connecting Ohio State with the community. So reciprocal as in like we want to teach the artists and students and faculty that are coming in, and we want them to teach us too. So we're trying to exchange ideas in that way. And then our mission is to challenge perceptions, deepen learning, and increase access to the arts. And if you've looked at the application, you might have already seen that on there. And that's sort of one of the big things we're emphasizing. We want to see how these projects are challenging perceptions of what art is, how it's made, viewed, or understood. And we want to deepen learning, like how can we engage the public in a way that's really changes their view of something, makes them think more deeply about an idea. And then with increasing access to the arts, like how can we get more people able to engage with this? And also our hours is important to note, just because if you're thinking about your exhibition run or other things like that, programming, we're open Tuesdays through Saturdays, 11 to 6, except for on Thursdays, we're open until 8 p.m., like many museums. And then, so here are some images of those spaces if you haven't had the chance to come down here. Although this also shows the ways that the gallery can be adjusted for the show. So there's oftentimes, we'll paint walls, we have movable walls, we have pedestals. So you might come and visit the gallery and it will look completely different the next time you come see it because the show has transformed the space. So we have part of the upper gallery here. That was a group show from Iran, Deciphering Violence and Resistance. And then this is a portion of the lower gallery that had another show. This was a solo exhibition of like a embroidery from an artist in the Eastern Congo. And so those 2 shows actually coexisted in the space. So, and they're both sort of related to like post-colonial violence And so they complemented each other nicely, even though they were about different regions of the world. And then I also mentioned the corridor space. So this is the leading up to our gallery that has the two main spaces. So the corridor space is actually quite large and can accommodate a number of pieces. And this is good for shows that have like a smaller amount of work where you can't necessarily fill a whole half of the gallery. So in the corridor, we had this was a photographer and a poet who collaborated, and they had like photos and poems next to each other. And then they had programming also in the corridor where they had a reading and an artist talk. So we were able to put chairs out there and benches so they could talk amongst their work. And then this is a floor plan, and we're happy to send these floor plans if you reach out. We can just go ahead and email you that if you really want the specific measurements, because that can be very helpful in planning, especially if you're working with like large structural work or performances where you like, I need X amount of space. And so this will give you an idea of the size. There's also the height from the ceiling to the floor. And we have a lot of adjustable beams for lighting and projectors as well. And we're happy to set up if you want like a personal tour of the space, we're happy to do that, or you can just come and visit during our open hours. And then so the other space that's on campus is Hopkins Hall Gallery. And so this is our satellite location. It's on the oval, the big green space, and it's pretty close to the Wexner Center for the Arts. And it's in Hopkins Hall is the Department of Art building in Ohio State. And so it's a more intimate venue, but it's still pretty big. And there's we can also put movable walls in that space. So it's a very large open space, but there's ways to modify it. And there's also a projector room that I'll show you. And we still have ample programming there. I've loved all the workshops we've gotten to do there. We just most recently did like a printmaking workshop. And then this one is open Monday through Friday, 11 to 4. And then so here's our current show that's up in Hopkins. So this is the Peter Mager Memorial Exhibition. So it's an Ohio State design professor who passed away a few years ago. And so there's a team of designers from around the country who wanted to create an exhibition memorializing his work. So they had like all these panels designed. So you can kind of see the depth of the space with this. And then this show has a particularly long exhibition run because we had another show that had to cancel. So it's going to be into the space until December 13th, if you want to just come see the size of everything. And then there's this projector room. It's sort of off to the side there. There's currently a film there right now too. They're using it. But you can also, there's enough room to fit like a table or like hanging installations. I've seen people do that before as well. So it's nice to have like a few. So it's our mini black box, as it were. And Urban Art Space does have areas that we tend to use as black boxes as well, although it's not as closed off as it is at Hopkins. And then here's the layout for Hopkins. And so it is, we do have like this outside space. So you see the projector room in the bottom left. And then above that, that outside space is kind of the lobby. So we share it with the Department of Art. But when we do programming, we tend to set up tables there. And so that it doesn't necessarily, the program doesn't have to be in the gallery. So especially if you have like a big installation, you're like, oh, well, where would we have programming? We typically just have it right out front of the gallery, which is still inside. And then there's outdoors on the oval. And then our third venue is actually our online venue, so our website. We can sometimes have online exhibitions, especially if they're multimedia components. So Irrepressible Soul was an actual exhibition we had here, but it also had an online component. So it wasn't just in person. It had this other side because the curator of the show really wanted to make it accessible to all artists. So she had an open call for scholarship so that people could submit their work, especially those artists who weren't in the show. And so here's like what that website looked like. So there's a video, there's descriptions and tags just like you would have in the gallery space. And we tried to promote these works online as well so that we can like include them in our newsletter, and we can create flyers with QR codes and also, spotlight pieces where, if we want to do an Instagram post or something that's spotlighting individual works in that online show so that it still gets the same amount of attention as our in-person exhibitions. Oops, there we go. And then now, so our team here at UAS, so like I said, there's 6 of us here. When I started, there was only 4 of us, so we've acquired 2 new people in the past year. And so Ryan is our director, pronounced Marijn van der Heijden. And then we have Dr. Taran Banner. He's our manager of community learning experience. He handles all of our community programming. And then I handle all the marketing, social media, website. And then Ashley Martin is our internship coordinator. And we do have a very large team of interns who can help staff events and programming and help with install. Although Kuhn Varai, he will be managing a lot of the install process. We also have a part-time preparator who can help with install too. And then we have Kate Durham, who's our newest addition, and she helps with the administrative side of things. So with ordering supplies or the fiscal side and logistics. And then we do have roughly 15 to 20 interns at any time, including design interns who do a lot of the marketing assistance for us. So if an artist requests that they want a design in-house, we'll have one of our student design interns assist with that. And then we have photo and video interns who will provide photo documentation of the shows and events. And we also have professional writing interns who can help with writing press releases or conducting artist interviews for our blog and things like that. And then in general, I mentioned how we have students and faculty and staff at Ohio State who use this space and across all departments. It's particularly in the spring and fall. So you might have noticed on the application, we're mainly looking for projects between like May and November for urban art space. And then for Hopkins, Hopkins is actually closed in the summer so that we can focus on our summer projects here. And that one's more, Hopkins is more for like fall shows there. And that's because of this curricular calendar. So we typically have commitments with the Department of Art in the spring and certain times in the fall. And then we also, like I mentioned, worked with local, regional, national, and international partnerships. Typically, we have somebody with the connection to Ohio is like the curator, and then they get to bring in outside artists that way. And that's just our way of like limiting our, who we're working with so that we don't have to worry so much about the logistics of travel and transportation because that can be difficult. And how is the space used? So we have free exhibitions and performances and programmings for the public all year round. And then our space is also for experience-based learning for our interns. So it's part of what like them helping out the artist is to the benefit of the artist, but also for the students to get this hands-on learning experience. So they help with the installation and the marketing and the programming. And here we have an example of performance, Bibliomancy by Michael Morris. So that was from last summer. That was submitted through our proposals. And so that was like a dance performance in just one portion of the space. And then our big thing is that we really value our commitment to the Columbus community and trying to partner with organizations and nonprofits so as much as possible. So we love to see projects that are like, oh, this is in collaboration with, the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. And like, so those types of projects are of particular interest to us. And we really try to make all of our programming and exhibitions free for the community. And really promoting culturally responsive arts opportunities. So specifically, people from different backgrounds, things that are speaking to current events and current issues. And this year was a chalk event that we had downtown where we often work with Downtown Columbus Inc. And sometimes they provide us funding to pay artists to do certain community programming events like live painting or chalk drawing. Now I wanted to touch on the different types of projects that you might see here and that you might be able to submit. So that's why we kind of changed the title from exhibition proposals to project proposals, because we found that exhibitions aren't the only thing that we do, but we do have that is probably maybe 70% of what we do. But yeah, so an example of a solo exhibition we had recently that was from our last proposal round is There Are No Lies That Change the Version of You I Had. And this featured abstract sculptures from Hannah Fitzgerald. And so she took the upper gallery space here, and her pieces were really about like her complex relationship with her mother. That really spoke to a lot of people, like visitors who came into the space. And so you can see how she has like a lot of breathing room between her pieces, and there's sort of a combination of like wall and hanging and like set up pieces like spread across the floor. And then another type is a collaborative exhibition where you have two artists, and instead of their work sort of being separate in the space, it's all intermingled and like in conversation with each other directly. So this is another one from recently from August. And so this had Alex McClay and Stephanie Barry, and it was like printmaking, sculptures, and then as well as weavings. And it was challenging the typical conceptions of women's work in terms of craft. And so they were in the lower gallery space. So which I feel like the lower gallery space has almost four areas. And so you can see like the top left, that's like sort of the first area. And then it looks into the window, that window well area, with the land in photo. And then there's this other large space, and next to that is this kind of dark room because it's kind of hidden from the window well, so we can kind of block it off for any sort of screening. So they did have a film in that little back area. And then another common type is a group exhibition. So this is where you have, anywhere between, three plus, to 20 artists in the space. I think we've had like 30 artists in the space before. Usually that requires the whole gallery. But in this case, A Love Letter to This Bridge Called My Back was a very interesting exhibition in that it was very text-based. So there was an anthology that these two artists had edited, and then they invited the contributors to bring pieces to the exhibition. So if you're a literary artist or you work in like multimedia, this is one way of considering that, where so like we had poems on the wall in the vinyl, and we had or phrases on the wall in vinyl, and then they brought in like there was some, sort of multi like collage poems on the wall. And they also had these pedestals. So we had the pedestals and they brought objects and they had these portraits of the different authors or figures in the book like hanging from the ceiling, and then they had a video projector behind that. So even though it was a very textual based show, it had all of these visual components they were able to bring to the gallery. And then performances. I love having performances. Obviously, performances don't have as long of a runtime. They typically they'll have, two or three or four performances. We do have one-off performances as well. And usually they recur within the same week. So for this show, Contrary Motion, this was a performance of solo and ensemble works by queer composers. And so they had an open rehearsal and then they had like a final premiere like event for the performance. But it was like both were open to the public. And so you can see they had all their instruments, and the seating was set up in that lower gallery space. And we had another show up at the same time, so they got to perform in front of that work. I really love this one because they're performing in front of Lisa McLyman's work, and like this is like for a Pride Month like performance, so that just made me very happy. And that exhibition was like the Frequency exhibition was about like Afrofuturistic art and featured a lot of different artists. And then another type is community projects and research. So this show was from, I believe, 2023. And so Beyond Guilt was about people that had been incarcerated, and then when they come out, like how do they tell their story and go beyond the guilt that they're assigned with. So this was a project with some researchers at Ohio State and across other universities. You'll see Northern Kentucky is mentioned here and Cincinnati. And then they also had the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. And so how this worked, like this looked like as research and as storytelling is that they had just these like panel boards, kind of just presentations, but they also had videos of the people whose stories were featured. And they had this take action board to so that visitors could engage with it that way. And they also had a panel discussion that was really wonderful. And so we moved into the lower gallery space so they would have more room for that instead of having it out in the corridor. But that's an example of how to display research in a way that would still fit the gallery space. And then now, so for some examples of community programming, this is really, the sky's the limit. We're all for like creativity with things, but I always like to give people ideas so they have a starting point. But so that can be anything from a panel discussion, which is, quite common. You have, like 3 to 6 people or however many. This particular panel discussion had people from Iran who dialed in from Zoom, and then we also had in-person panelists. So we had both, and we recorded that panel, and we typically upload those to our YouTube channel and caption them. But and then you can also have an artist talk or a guided tour. You can have like a hands-on workshop doing some type of craft or writing or anything like that. There's some that have performance components, so they'll have a visual exhibition, but then they might have like a dance or like another kind of something that the public will come to attend that specific event in conjunction with the exhibition. You can have a reading, a film screening, some kind of demonstration. I think we're talking about doing a dumpling making demonstration for this current show because there's something related to like food accessibility and design. And then any sort of collaborations with community partners. So if you want to do community programming and you want to do it somewhere like not at Urban Art Space, that's something that we can still help support by like we can bring food, we can bring staffing, we can help with the planning and the marketing. So if you wanted to have an off-site event somewhere, we can help with that too. And so one of our signature events is the Artist Commune or Artist Commune. And so it's held on the last Friday evening of each month, typically, although sometimes it's a little different depending on our schedule. But the one from August, we actually worked with the Artist of Women's Work, where I showed you some of those pictures earlier. And they did a screen printing workshop where we had like tote bags and they could use beading and they could use painting, and the artists had their own screen print design for people to put on bags. And so that was super well attended, very popular. It was wonderful. And so our artist commune is a different theme every month. So that was, tote bag screen printing, but it could be collage, it could be live figure drawing, it could be fashion show, photo walks, and we like working with artists on this. But we also plan them in-house. So, but if you're like, oh, hey, my show is going to be at the end of this month, we could do an artist commune around this type of workshop. Like, we would like to see that too. And then so I mentioned the performances as being part of exhibitions. So this was a show in January. They had like a live skating performance in the gallery, which I love. Our floors are quite slippery, so I don't know how they managed, but it's a concrete flooring. But so the artist had all his paintings up and then had friends and other community members come in to skate. And then these artists, they had sculptures and weavings. And then they had this metronome performance where they're doing like a tape design on the wall. And it was actually really cool because when they finished the tape design, all of that served as the background for like another music performance for a totally different artist. So I really like to see those almost impromptu collaborations. Yes, there we go. Okay, so now to the project proposals in that format. So on our website, you'll find the form. There's a big red button. I'll show you where that is. The deadline is November 10th at 5 p.m. ET. And so we're looking for any of those types of projects. Oh, yes. Is there somebody? Oh, maybe not. But yes, so yeah, and then so the timeframes that we're looking for is for Urban Art Space, it's May through November. We're looking for next year and the following year. And then for Hopkins, it's August through December, so mostly the fall range, 2025, 26. And yeah, and I will say for Hopkins that you have to be mindful of when classes start and end. So like classes typically start like late August and then they end like early December. So you might not want a show that goes until like December 20th because there might not be that many people at Hopkins on campus. But yes, and then here's one example of a show that we had at Hopkins Hall Gallery that was a very immersive installation. Like she built out a house, like a ruined house, and there was like audio and all of that. And she built it for the size of the space. So you can see it's actually quite large, but it still has pretty good sized ceilings. And so here's where you'll find the actual proposal. Oh, yes, I see somebody has their hand raised.
Yes, for the Hopkins online, is that like I was hearing a little bit of what you're saying, but I have a little one. But is it like an online exhibition or is it like in person where OSU students can see it?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Hopkins is definitely in person. Like you could have any online components that you want, but Hopkins has, yeah, it's totally in person, as is Urban Art Space. And so it's the only tricky thing with, well, I guess both Hopkins and Urban Art Space is like, it's good to, we try to instruct people where to park because sometimes that's hard on campus. But that's why we decided to close Hopkins in the summer, actually, because there's not enough foot traffic on campus in the summer. So it's much more popular in the fall to have it there. Great.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And then so if you want to find where our proposal is, so that's uas.osu.edu, and then you'll see the submit a project proposal button there. And once you click on that, it will open it up to our page. And so there's some of the things that we already mentioned, the venues, the timeframes. And then we also have a few considerations for a stronger proposal. So we really are looking for longer shows, so we don't have so quick of a turnaround, and people can really, hear about the exhibition and come visit it. So we're looking for 5 weeks or longer for exhibitions, although obviously performances, they can be like a one-off performance, and that's okay too. Um, and then the community programming component. So we really want to see, some type of community programming that we're offering to free for the public for them to engage with the work, especially because we find that we get the most attendance at those types of events. So, we get visitors to both galleries, every day, but it's the most attendance is always going to be from one of those programming components. And then we really want all projects to address our mission, challenging perceptions, deepening learning, increasing access to the arts. So I definitely recommend using some of that language in your project description. And then we're looking to, have different perspectives and backgrounds. And then with the ties to Ohio, you'll see our definition of that here. We're talking about, people who live and work in Ohio, students who may have attended here, or, even in the past, if they were alumni, and then or curators bringing an outside Ohio artist. And so really that limitation is about making sure we don't receive a lot of applications where, they need to transport work here, and that might not be feasible because we can't pay for any transportation, and that's all up to the artist. And so just logistically, it tends to be easier if they're bringing in the work locally. And then so you'll see there's an applicant information section here. And so you'll want to put in the full name of your project lead and just assign somebody as that. So if you're part of a group exhibition, you'll just assign one person to like, hey, we'll have you put your name on this. Like they don't necessarily have to be the curator. They just have to be whoever's submitting the application. Although the project lead also needs to submit their CV as one of the two CVs. So you can keep that in mind as well. And then the artist website is optional, as are the collaborators, because it's we definitely accept solo exhibitions, so it doesn't need to, you don't need to have any collaborators with a project, but that's just something to, so you have room to specify that. And then Ohio State Department affiliation, that's also, it's not like it's not a requirement at all, and like there's not necessarily a preference for Ohio State departments either. So. And then with your project title, and it can be a working title. Like often artists will change their title later, and that's fine. And then the project type, we have like a list of some, but then there's an other slot. And then if you check that, you can always, your description will kind of clarify what that is. And the preferred venues, yeah, generally, like I think you can select multiple. So if you have multiple ones that you're happy with, but you can kind of specify that more down in the space activation section that we'll touch on. So there's these two sections, project summary and full project description, and they can feel kind of similar, but so the difference is that the project summary is 100 words or fewer, and that's more external. So like imagine you're sharing this with an audience, like how would you advertise the show to the general public? And then the full project description is more internal, like how would you share this with, like if you're writing like a grant or to another artist and you're talking about what your show is doing and what it's about. And we're particularly interested, like, well, what's your process like as an artist? Like, what kind of inspiration or conceptual ideas do you draw from? Like, how does that inform your work? And so those are just a way to give us a better idea of your artistic process. And then with the preferred dates, we have those date ranges again, and you can offer multiple dates. So if you feel like, okay, well, this date might not work, but if you have like multiple, you're like this or this, that's also very helpful in our planning. And so we can't guarantee the first choice of date and location. And I think that when we're going through these applications, the committee will know that, if we really like a project and then we're like, well, the time frame doesn't work, we can always reach out to the artist and be like, would this date work for you? And sometimes it just doesn't work, but like we're not going to dismiss a project just because whatever time frame you put isn't like in our available in our calendar. We'll try to work with the artist to find a date that works for everybody. And then space activation. So this question I find it's always a little hard, but this is usually the layout of the space. So what you're thinking of in terms of like, okay, well, what are you going to put where? Like if you're thinking like, okay, I want it to be in the upper gallery at Urban Art Space, there's going to be hanging sculptures, there's going to be video projection. So you're kind of visualizing what the space looks like and um, trying to tell us like, okay, this is what it will involve. And then, audiences will move through the space and they'll be able to look up and see these things above them. And like, so that's sort of what we're talking about when you're, how do you want the audience to interact with the work? And then community programming, as I mentioned, like there's a section for that, and then you can kind of, put a name on it and then put like a general description of it. And that just kind of helps us have an idea ahead of time of what you want to do in conjunction with the project. And then the timeline. Um, so the timeline will incorporate some of the other elements that you mentioned. So if you mentioned the exhibition, the runtime, and you mentioned the programming, but then now we really want to see the installation and the teardown time. So, and that's going to be variable depending on the show. Some shows only need 1 day of installation, some shows need 2 weeks. And so that's something that we have to account for in the calendar. So you can put specific days or you can put like a duration. So if like if you're like, well, I really want the exhibition to be these dates, then you can put those dates above it. But it's basically giving us a sense like, okay, yeah, this is going to be, they need a week for install. They need like, 2 days for teardown. And then that way we can, work it amongst the other shows that we're considering. And then budget and needs. So this section is it's a little, um, it's a little bit of a misnomer in the sense that budget is more to show that it is a realistic project and it's not what we can offer. Like, so sending us a budget, like we really can't pay artists, we can't cover the cost of shipping. Like we can only really do in-kind contributions, meaning stuff that we can produce in-house that we already have. So, but you can put for your needs, if you're like, well, I need vinyl, I need like extra vinyl for like, I'm doing poems on the wall, I'll need like 3 poems on the wall with vinyl. For installation, like, yeah, I need help with install pedestals. You're like, you might have seen those in the love letter installation. You're like, yes, I need 5 of those pedestals. I need a display case. And then, I need like, 3 TV screens, things like that. And so we can provide all of these things. And I think we don't really have a budget for anything external except for maybe $100 in supplies for like a workshop. So if you're like, I need some watercolors and things, we have actually quite a bit of art supplies in the back that we can provide, like paint and brushes and drawing paper. We have a lot of that. But if you need something specialized, like for the screen printing workshop, we had to buy ink, which is quite expensive. But like we wanted to do that workshop. And so we were able to purchase that from our internal funds. But yeah, so keep that in mind when you're putting the budget. It's not so much that you're like, hey, this is the amount of money that I need, like from you. It's like, oh, well, we're not going to be able to provide that. But we want to make sure that, if you're doing a project that is very ambitious, that you have some other source of funding for it or some other way that you're going to make sure it's achievable. And then there's for the artist CV and resume, there's just going to be 2 project participants for that section. So just choose whoever has the strongest or whoever is like most relevant to the project, including the project lead. And then we have it at 6 images or videos representing the work. And you can just put your artist name, piece title for each one. So for example, if you're doing a group show, you could have just like 1 image from like if 6 of the artists, like you're like, well, we have like 20 artists, but we know we're only allowed 6 images. It's like, well, you just put 6 images to show the variety of pieces that might be featured. Okay, and then so once we have all those web forms, all those files, we have a bunch of folders labeled by artist name and the title of the project, and all those folders will be shared with our outside committee, which is composed of both people from Ohio State and people from in the community. And they will all receive this rubric where they will rank the projects by these evaluation criteria. And these are also on the website. You'll see these 4. The quality and clarity of the work and materials, the experimentation with how art is imagined, made, viewed, or understood, the breadth of community impact, the programming components that foster conversations and represent diverse perspectives, and then the alignment with Urban Art Space's mission. And so they have that rating scale of just 1 through 5, and then they can put more notes about, the strengths or if they have any questions. So if they see that like the budget is like, like $1 million and they're like, oh, we're a little concerned that they might not be able to meet their budget and like carry out this project. And then that's something that we would reach out to the artist about to ask more questions. And then Oh yeah, and then in terms of the timeline for responses, we hope to send out decisions in late December or early January so that we can get everything on the calendar. Um, but yes, let's see. And so I wanted to give you one example before we open for Q&A. So this is from last year. This was submitted through our proposal system. It's called Meandering North. This was a collaborative show between two artists, and it was also had a workshop component. And so, yeah, the two artists here, and they provided their summary of this is the 100-word like kind of external version, which is very similar to what we used for promoting it. So that's also part of what this exhibition summary is for, is like we can easily copy paste it, you can update it, but it makes it much easier when we're like marketing and putting things together. We have something to work from. And so they had weavings and they had ceramics, and they were kind of focused on Nordic landscapes and talking about like isolation and the feminist connections to the environment. And so then they had a full description. And so you'll see it's like, about twice as long, a bit more. And so they talked about why they kind of chose this as a subject. So they had residencies in Sweden and Norway. And then they go into more of the art speak, the academic speak, as it were, talking about the phenomenology and perception, the narratives of our relationships with nature and time, things like that. So that's the conceptual underpinnings of the show and the artwork. And then the location and time, they suggested Hopkins Hall Gallery Urban Art Space in August. So we actually ended up doing Hopkins Hall for them because it was kind of a more constrained space that would fit the work better. And so space activation. So here's this one I wanted to point out specifically with theirs. Like they did a great job depicting how the space would be used. So they're saying there's 2D and there's 3D works and dialogue together. The walls will have paintings and weavings. The central area will have two large weavings hung by dowel rods, monofilament suspended in space, which presents a 360-degree view. And yes, and so they have like, here's where this is how the sculptures will be installed. And then they mention also the workshop that they'll be having as part of how the community can engage. And so that they would create these small paper weavings that would be on display in the gallery as well. And then so their budget, so they put all this information here. So again, it was they put the dates as well for their install. But yeah, with the budget, the things that we paid for were the papers, watercolors, and brushes for the workshop, and the food and drinks for the opening reception and the workshop. And so food and drinks, like we don't do like big catered events. We typically do like snack plates, like kind of charcuterie style. And then yeah, so I think that they paid for the transportation. Obviously, we did the vinyl for the show. And then yes, and then although we have photo and video interns, they aren't like at a professional level. Like they'll provide photos with a high quality camera, but that doesn't mean that they've had like a lot of experience taking professional photography. But yes, and then they had the artists submitted samples of their work. So that you can just get it when you're attaching those images, like, okay, what kind of things are we looking for? It helps for us to know just the appearance of the work. Yeah, these have all of the different mediums as well. We don't ask for that in this current iteration, but it can be helpful if you wanted to specify that somewhere else, like in the project summary. Then we had their bios with the CVs, and then this was the workshop description that they provided, where they were talking about like the memories, relationship with nature, and they had participants bring a photo of a landscape that's precious to them, and then everyone will kind of share about that, the storytelling, and then they had us like do a watercolor, and then we did a weaving where we cut up the paper and then we weaved them together. And so this was how the show played out. So that was the proposal, and then you can see how it actually looks in the space. And then there was the watercolor workshop as well, and that's the outside area I was talking about, like right outside in front of the gallery. There's space for us to set up tables. And yes, and then so you can also follow Urban Art Space on social media. You'll see more photos of all of our events, things like that. And this wall was specially painted for this was last year's Irrepressible Soul exhibition. So they did bring in spray paint and they spray painted that wall and we had to paint over it and I was very sad. But that yes, it's one of my favorites. So yes, let's open it up for Q&A. Um, yes, let me know what kinds of questions that you have. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm kind of curious, and sorry if you already mentioned this, but in terms of a group show, I saw that there was an example where someone a curator had an open call for a group show. Obviously, the artists are in Ohio. I myself, I'm born and raised went to Columbus. My mom went to OSU, and I'm thinking of doing a collaboration with her as an alum. But I'm interested in the group show aspect. If I were to do an open call in Columbus, Ohio, how would that look like with submitting potential artwork if the artists aren't there yet? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And we've had that question before. It is quite difficult because I think we really like to see the work that will be in the space before accepting the project. But I think that if you have a few, I think my approach to that would be have part of it be curated and then like so part of it have some confirmed artists and then like the rest be an open call. That way you have examples of work of like the type of vibe and you know the yeah so I think and especially the theme if there's like a theme to the open call that you can be like okay it'll be like work like this like such as from these artists like those can be your featured artist. So that might be one way to approach it because it is a little it's tough for us to evaluate something that doesn't exist yet because it's we don't want to accept a show and then like they bring the work and then we're like, oh well, actually this isn't a good fit. Like that would be very awkward. So, but yeah, I appreciate that question very much. Okay, yes, I think Jane, I saw you raise your hand.
Yep. Yeah, I have a question. So the flooring I know is cement in
Mhm.
the space, and so there you don't have any kind of other flooring, correct?
No, we don't. But we do have
Great.
we regularly have dance performances here though, so like somehow they manage, but it is something to be I always recommend that people come and practice on it, you know, and have rehearsals and things because yeah, it can be challenging.
And if you're doing a program with a workshop or some sort, do you recommend days that are better for attendance, days or times?
Yes, like so since we're open late on Thursday evenings, I typically recommend that. And there's also less competition in terms of what other events might be going on around town on like a Friday or Saturday. But we do typically have our performances on like Thursday, Friday to Saturday. And yeah, and I think like sometimes the Thursday nights they really surprise me how well the attendance is. But I think Saturdays tend to be our most popular for evening performances.
One last question is, in the bio section, it said two bios, and then it said, do you want our bio and then the two artists' bio, or do you want just two bios, whether it's the
Yeah,
presenter or
Yeah, I think it's just because we know that the committee isn't necessarily going to want to read the bios of like every artist who's participating. So it's just really, I would say, you know, whoever the lead is, whether it's a curator, the project manager, and then one of the artists, that might give us an idea. And then also if you list the artist on there, it's something we can always like look at their websites or yeah, look more information about them.
Thank you.
It's great. Okay, and then Sierra.
Yes. For the what are the times that we can visit the urban art space so we can get like an idea of, the space that we would use?
Oh, yes. So you're welcome to visit during any of our open hours. So for our downtown location, that's Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 6 or 11 to 8 on Thursdays. And then if you want any sort of special tour or like a guided aspect of it, you're welcome to just email us and we can set up a meeting for that.
Okay, and then one last question. Should we write in third person, like for people who are doing solo exhibits?
I think you don't necessarily have to. I think like because sometimes, you know, for the project description, you might do that in third person. I've seen both. So like I think that really depends on your personal style. You're not going to be, marked one way or the other. Like I tend to see, more third person for the 100-word one since it's like external facing. And then for the full product description, it'll be like, oh, I, we are, yeah. So
Okay, sweet. Thank you.
very good. Okay, Adam.
Hi, Dan. I just had 2 points that I'd like to quickly confirm regarding the connection to Ohio. Well, I'm the project lead and I'll be helping with curation, and I'm a OSU alum.
Yeah.
The contemporary manga artists I'll be planning to work with, I don't think any of them have a connection to Ohio, but that's still okay, right?
Yes. Yes, yes. So like for like a Ron show, the curator was an assistant professor at Ohio State, and I think almost all the artists were from outside of Ohio. So that's the only way that we like limit it. It's just by like having you basically just need one person and you can kind of swing that however you want. Yes.
Okay, good to know. And then one other thing is we're still currently getting a lot of details figured out, but we will have a core summary and vision for the proposal. But after the fact, after submission, we will probably have quite a few changes made. Less subtraction, more addition to what we want to do, and what we can offer.
Mhm.
How flexible is UAS regarding that?
Yes, I'd say we're very flexible. We don't want we don't want like the whole show to change. That's the only thing. But if you have like a core
Right.
thing, and then as more details become clear, that you can flesh it out, that's great. So we understand this is pretty far advanced to plan, especially if you're proposing something in like 2026. It's like, oh wow, like 2 years from now, how much of that is going to be planned? So it's more we want to have like a good base to work from, and then we'll meet with all the artists individually or all the project groups individually to plan out those logistics. And we usually do have things that change or that are added. So we definitely expect that to happen, but we just don't want somebody to submit one thing and then their project does something entirely different. That's the only thing. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Great. And then Tasha.
Hello. I have a couple questions actually. First question is in terms of logistics in the urban art space. Like, what is your capacity for like tables and chairs? Or are those things that you already have and can provide? If so, like, what is the capacity that you can support?
Yes, I want to say we have 9 tables, like half tables. Well, actually, we might have more than that, like maybe a dozen. Like we have some that are sort of, there's these nice white display tables for receptions and things that look good. We have tablecloths for those. And then we have these bigger tables that are more like craft tables that look very messy, like they've been painted on many times. So those are for workshops and things. So we provide those. We have, I think, somewhere around 75 chairs. So it's a pretty good capacity. We can also sometimes we borrow tables or chairs from other places for particularly large events that we know will have a lot of attendance. We'll borrow them from the architecture firm across the street, and they'll let us have those for the evening. So
Nice. Okay. And then, so I'm a poet, so I'm thinking about the
Mhm.
vinyl printing that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Is there like a limit on how much of that we could do in an exhibition or a show?
Yes, I think so because vinyl it is quite expensive, but more than that, it's also very time consuming it'll make the install very long. So I
Mhm.
think the most that we did, if you went to the Ajane's show over the summer that she had, oh man, I want to say there was maybe 6 poems on the walls across the full gallery. There might have been more than that, but it was quite a lot of vinyl. So I think that's like it is something under discussion. Like we don't really want to have like a whole gallery filled with vinyl, but as long as the expectation is clear up front, that's super helpful. So I would rather like, a slight overestimate than an underestimate
Yeah,
because yeah, just to not be surprised. But it's something that we can definitely cover. And we only have black and then I think we might have some white vinyl, but we don't have color vinyl.
got it.
So mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so any other questions or comments here? I see somebody asked about a floor plan for the exhibit spaces. So yes, I can send those, the ones that I showed during the presentation. I'm happy to send those to any of you. So just reach out. Our email is uas@osu.edu, or you can reach out to me directly. I'm Coleman.11, KOLLMAN.11 @osu.edu. And yeah, and if you have any questions after this, feel free to reach out. Happy to answer. And I can also ask the other staff members for things that I might not know, like the installation side. So we have everybody sort of specializes, so I can draw on them as well. So great, excellent. Thank you all for coming. I'm very excited to see your proposals. So yes, thank you so much. And I'll send you all this recording as well.